I had met Jesus. And things had changed in my life. My story was different. It hadn't been a long time, and someone invited me to this church to go and share my story. And as I am entering the doors of this church, there's this young woman that knew me pre-Jesus. And she was very surprised that I would be anywhere near church. So when I opened the door, she didn't say hi. She asked me, "What are you doing here?" And my response was, "Well, someone invited me." And she said, "Really? Who?" I said, "Well, that gentleman over there is like, oh, wow." What she didn't know is that I was invited to speak. So the service went by, the worship music went by, and when it was time to invite the speaker, I came up, and I could see her jaw drop. And she wasn't very happy. She stood up in the middle of the service, and she made sure that I was able to see her. And she looked at me in disgust. And she turned around, and she left. And when she left, I was troubled by my story. Because she knew my story. And I was greatly ashamed by my story. It seems like I was trying to run away from it, hide it, pretend it was not there, ignore it as much as possible. But that day became tangible, that my story was following me all the way to church. How about you? You see, odds are that you have done things that you regret, that you have made decisions that you're ashamed of. And it may be that your story is following you to the point that it even accompanies you to church. And it's there when you worship, and it's there when you try to pray, and it's there when you try to open your word, and it's there when you try to change your ways, and the story just creeps up on you all the time. And I don't know what that story may be. But I've heard so many stories of people regretting being the husbands they once were, or the wives they once were, or regretting being this or that type of parent, or daughters or sons, and just feeling ashamed and troubled by their stories following them wherever they would go. So today we're going to try to answer some questions and try to look at them in a story that Jesus, a dialogue that Jesus had with a particular woman. And we're going to try to answer this question: what can we do with our story? What can we do with our guilt and our shame? Is God actually interested in our story? And if He's there, can He change it? The story comes from a man, James John, who was the youngest disciple, the youngest follower of Jesus. He was a rambunctious one, to the point that where Jesus met him, he called him and his brother sons of thunder. And his story changed in a way because he he spends some time with Jesus, and he writes his account of things that he saw and experienced while his story was transformed by Jesus. And he writes a book that we today call the book of John, or the Gospel of John. And we're going to take a look at this story, and we're going to pick it up in John chapter 4, verse 4 and 5. Jesus, had to go through Samaria on the way. And eventually he came to a Samaritan village of Sychar. How do you pronounce it in English? Sychar. All right. That's wrong. Near the field of Jacob, that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. So Jesus has to go. He's moving from Judah, and he wants to go up to Galilee. And right smack in the middle, there's a big problem called Samaria. And Jesus decides that instead of doing the Pharisee thing, or the religious people thing of going all around Samaria to go into Galilee, he goes straight to Samaria. And there's some tensions boiling up, and we're going to talk a little bit about those tensions. Jacob was there, and Jesus was tired from the long walk. He sat wearily beside a well about noontime. We see one of the main points of the book of John is to prove, he builds a case to say, you see, Jesus was God, the Messiah. But at the same time, he says Jesus was also human, to the point where he got tired, where he was weary, where he was exhausted. At times you see Jesus sad, to the point where he calls his disciples and said, please pray with me because I'm so sad. I feel I'm going to die. And I don't know if you have been brought up with the idea that God is so out there that he cannot relate to your story. But Jesus can. He got tired. He got mad. He got sad, yet without sin. And the writer of Hebrews tells us that he identifies so much with us. He says, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one in all points tempted as we are. Yet, and here's the difference, without sin. Let us therefore come boldly through the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. You see, Jesus can identify with your story. It doesn't matter how bad you think your story is, Jesus can identify and he can sympathize with your story. He gets to this place and he's tired. He's exhausted. There's something incredible happens. Soon, a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, please give me a drink. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. Now, there are some major problems here. There are some real problems between the Jews and the Samaritan. And let me explain you a little bit of the problems that they have. And maybe, just maybe, you can relate to some of these issues. Just maybe. You see, Jacob, one of the founding fathers of Israel, had a favorite son. His son was named Joseph. He was such a favorite that his brothers sold him into slavery because he didn't like the guy. It's a long story, but Joseph had a couple of sons called Ephraim and Manasseh. And Jacob blessed his son Joseph with a special blessing. He gave him the special land, which became a very, very fertile land. And the other tribes that were around him were not too happy about this. Time passed, and in 1772, Assyria conquered Israel, and took the Jews, the Israelites, captive and brought in colonists from Babylon to replace them. Some of the Jews stayed behind, and 70 years later, after this captivity, they released 43,000 Israelites to go and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, you see what the kingdom of Israel was divided into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, they built its capital right in Samaria. And after they released these captives, these 43,000 captives, the people that still lived in Samaria were not very happy that they were building now this new capital in Jerusalem, and they tried to do everything in their power to stop them. The people that inhabited Samaria, the Jews that were left there, had married people from other races. And they were worshiping in different ways. So when Jesus is here at this well, he is worried, he is exhausted, he is tired, and this woman shows up. There is a big problem that shows up. And let me explain. When I was reading, I thought, oh, this is a problem. Here's a problem. She's a Samaritan. And there's like, oh, no, here's another problem. So I scratched that. And it's like, oh, there's two problems. No. So I scratched that. And it's like, oh, no, there's three problems. And then I realized there's at least four problems. And when I looked at these four problems, I realized, oh, my. Maybe there's some people that can identify with these. Maybe. You see, the first problem was a political problem. There was a big political division of where should be the headquarters for the people of God. The Samaritans said that they should worship in Gerizim, that Samaria should be the capital, and the Jews said, no, it should be Jerusalem. There's a big political divide. There was also, very interesting, a race problem. Because the Jews considered the Samaritans a mixed breed. Then there was also a religion problem. Because the Jews thought that the Samaritans did not worship the right way. And the Jews were the only ones who were worshiping the right way. And then Jesus is encountered with a gender problem. You see, there's a woman approaching the well. He is by himself. The woman is by herself. And she is a Samaritan. Could it be that any of us could relate to any of these issues? Could it be that we experience something like this and sometimes we take one posture or take the other? And I wonder, so Jesus confronted by this issue, what would his attitude be? Being a Jew, what would his attitude be towards this Samaritan woman? And here's what John tells that happens in verse 9. No, sorry, verse 8. Jesus says, please give me a drink. You see, Jesus took a vulnerable position and asked for help. Jesus, when confronted with problems of race, religion, politics, instead of demanding, instead of accusing, instead of stating his position, he assumed a vulnerable position and asked for help. And immediately, this woman was surprised. John tells us that she was incredibly surprised because Jesus was supposed to be separated by these problems of politics, race, religion, and gender. And it doesn't faze him. Immediately, Jesus asks her for help, and she says this woman was surprised, for the Jews refused to have anything with the Samaritans. She said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan. I am a woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" You see what she's doing? She's questioning Jesus' motives. What's your agenda here? What's the angle that I'm not figuring right now? What are you trying to do? I mean, like, really trying to do here? Because we know the Jews and Samaritans, we don't get along. I am a woman, you're a man, and you're asking me, something must be wrong here. And look at what Jesus tells her, how he responds to her. He says, Jesus replied, "If only you knew the gift God has for you and who you are who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." Now, you see, Jesus is not playing games. Jesus is not trying to change the conversation. She is asking for Jesus' motives, and Jesus is plainly stating his motives. You see, Jesus' motives was to give her the gift of God. Jesus' motives was for her to understand to whom she was speaking with. These were his true motives. And I don't know what you have been brought up with, but I remember as we were being brought up, and my grandma would say at times, "Hey, you should behave well, because if not, Jesus is going to cry." Or you should do this and that because, up here they're going to punish you. Going to punish you. And I don't know if you grew up thinking that Jesus' motivation, that God's motivation, is for you to walk on the straight or narrow, because when you don't, he's out there to get you. And instead of thinking of a loving, caring, providing, present Father, you have a hard time with that. Because you brought up with this image of God, that he's just there out to get you, to see where you're failing in order to punish you. And apparently he takes some type of joy in punishing you. Or I don't know if you were brought up with a distant idea of a distant God, that he was maybe out there somewhere, but surely he had more important things to attend than you. Surely he was pretty occupied with business around the world, so he had no time to really listen to what you needed or what you were going through or how your story was developing. But Jesus, his true motives are always to give us the best gifts from God. He wants peace for you. He wants joy for you. He wants for you to have the desires of your heart. Us as fathers, as parents, we want the best for our children, and we're wicked. But God, he's perfect, and he wants the very, very best. And Jesus is open. He is upfront to this woman, and he tells her, only you knew the gift of God has for you. If only you knew how different your story could be. The story continues in verse 11. And she says, "But sir, you don't have a rope or a bucket," she says, "and this well is very deep. Where would you get this living water? And I sense a little of an attitude." Okay, so this is just the guy speaking now, right? I maybe with my 21st lenses here, but I sense, as I read that, like, she came with a little attitude that said, "And besides, you think you're greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? How can you offer better water than he and his sons and his animals enjoyed?" In other words, he's telling Jesus, "Excuse me, first of all, you don't have the tools that you need. Second of all, who do you think you are? Better than Jacob? Better than who? Because you're a Jew, is that it?" She gave a little attitude, but it's amazing how Jesus puts up with our things, with our doubt, with our attitude, and he keeps true to who he is and his love for us. And Jesus replies, "Anyone who drinks his water will soon become thirsty again. But those who drink the water I will give I give it will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. You see, at this moment, I think that they both knew that they weren't talking about this water inside the well. And this became a little uncomfortable for the woman as well. Jesus was talking about something greater, something bigger. And she as she hears this, you can sense that she's wrestling with her story. She's wrestling with this person that is interrupting her story. And Jesus comes in and says, "Woman, there's something that you're thirsting for. There's something more than this. And you and I, we both know it." And here's her response. "Please, sir," and then again, I just read sarcasm here. That's what I read. She says, "Please, sir, give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again. I don't have to come here to get the water." "Where do you have it?" "Sure, this is fantastic water that you have, right?" Jesus sees past that because he knows her story. And they have an incredible conversation because Jesus goes to the root of the issue here. And they have a fantastic conversation. And I want you to try to feel the love and the tenderness of Jesus trying to get and reach the heart of this woman. He says, "Well, go and get your husband." Jesus told her, "I don't have a husband," the woman replied. Jesus said, "You're right. You don't have a husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man that you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth." And I can't imagine that the attitude and the sarcasm went down the well. And he said, "Hold up. Who is this guy that knows my story?" And I can't imagine what went through her head. He's a Jew. Did he go to my town and somebody told him about me? Is there someone? How does he know my story? Why does he know? And why is he treating me well? Why he's not despising me? Why he's not shunning me? Why he's not judging me? Why is he not putting me down? Because that's what she was used to. You see, a woman that was divorced, I mean, a woman per se that had not much value in that culture at that specific time. And Jesus, time after time, spoke with women, met with women, and gave value to women regardless of their condition. And Jesus treats her well, with love, with decency, with tenderness. She thinks that he has some other cruel intentions. And then he cuts to the chase and says, "There's a problem. You're thirsty, and you're trying to satisfy that thirst with things that are not helping you. And you know that you're going through this road, and it's not good for you." And she responds incredibly to Jesus. And she says, "Well, sir," the woman said, maybe you're a prophet." And she tries to deviate the conversation a little bit from her to major issues. Because, we're kind of specialists in talking about the issues that other people have, that our country has, that our politicians have, that the leaders have, but please don't talk about my issues. And Jesus is talking about her issues, trying to speak life into her, trying to give her the gift of God. And she gives them, "Well, you must be a special person. You must be like a prophet or something." But here's a problem. He says, "So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here at the Mount Gerizim where our ancestors worshipped?" And Jesus keeps trying to speak into her heart. letting her know that it's not about rituals, that it's not about the exterior stuff that we pretend and do and discuss and argue about, but it's what's happening in our hearts. And Jesus says to them in verse 21, Jesus replied, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. But the time is coming indeed. It's here now when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship him and in spirit and in truth. He goes out, he doesn't spend time talking about the details, about the rituals, everything that's outside. And he says, the problem is not outside of you. The problem is not the people outside. The problem's inside. The problem's inside. The problem is that we want to fix people out there. We want to find the right ways, the right policies, the right leaders, while we are not willing to allow Jesus to fix what's on the inside. You see, the story of this woman was about to be incredibly, dramatically changed as she realized that what mattered, what was really important, what was happening in her heart. You see, it is great that we get together to worship. It is important. But if it's not affecting our heart, it is useless. It is great that we be part of a church, that we come to a church. That's great. It's Jesus' body. But if we don't allow Jesus, the owner of the body, to do some transformation, to come into our hearts, to lead our lives, to change the narrative of our story, then it's useless. Jesus spoke life into this woman. And as he is speaking to her, the woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who's called the Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. She finally opened her heart. You see, she had one hope. In spite of being shunned, in spite of being separated from the people because the lifestyle that she had chosen, her hope was in the Messiah. She still dreamt of the Messiah coming and explaining things and changing things. Explaining things like, maybe why did my husband did not value me? Why was he not there for me? If he promised that he would be there for me, why did he leave? You see, when the Messiah comes, he explains things and he shows things in the correct light. And she had hoped all her life to see this Messiah come. She opens his heart to Jesus. And Jesus answers to her, and he says, then Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. And when she heard this, her story changed. She was convicted that this man that was talking to her, that man that was showing respect, love, this man that knew her story and was not rejecting her, was the Messiah that she had longed for all her life. And in this great moment where Jesus reveals who he is, there's an awkward moment. Super awkward. Here's what John says. Just then, his disciples came back, and they were shocked to find him talking to a woman. I can't imagine in that moment Jesus revealing, I am the Messiah. And she's surprised, and she's wondering, and she's thinking in her heart. And all of a sudden, the disciples show up. I said, excuse me, Jesus, are we interrupting something here? We've been with you quite a while, and we've never seen you, talking alone with a woman. Do you need some privacy, Jesus? Is that okay? I mean, John says, but none of them had the nerve to ask, what are you doing with her? Or why are you talking with her? This awkward moment. And in this moment, this woman decides to do something incredible. in this very moment, in this awkward moment, this woman decides to do something with her story. And you can decide to do something with your story too. This is what happens. This is what the scriptures tells us. The woman left her water jar beside the well and ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" So the people came streaming from the village to see him. You see, this woman that had come in the noontime, maybe not to be full of people, where people would actually talk to her and have to mingle with people that knew her story. She came in at noontime because she needed water. And all of a sudden, she left her jar. And she's running back to the people. She's running back to the people because she knows that there are people just like her that have been wanting and waiting and wanting to have some answers. And she thinks that she has found the guy. She has found the Messiah that they have been hoping for. And she runs and transforms completely her story. Here's what I want you to take home. Here's what I want you to think about. Here's what I want you to wrestle with. Your worst story can become your best story. But there's an if. Your worst story can become your best story if you come to the living well. You don't have to be living that same old story over and over and over. Your worst story can become your best story if you come to the living well. This woman went running back home. And maybe as she was running, I don't know if she had any doubt, thinking, well, maybe they won't believe me because, I'm not part of the circle, I'm part of the gang there. Maybe they won't listen to me because of my reputation, because of my story. But she went anyway. And this is what the scriptures tells us that happened in verse 39. Many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, "He told me everything I ever did." Then they said to the woman, "Now we believe, not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard him ourselves. Now we know that he is indeed the Savior of the world." Now we know. Let me tell you, and then maybe ask you, what are you doing with your story? What have you done with it? Are you running? Are you leaving everything behind, your jar behind, the water behind, and you're running to the people that need to hear the story and say, "Hey, listen." I remember when I heard the gospel for the first time making sense in my heart. I got in my car. I was in this church. It was a vigil. It was probably like 10:30, 11. I went all the way to the town where my wife, back then, my girlfriend was living. It was late at night. I knocked on her door. I asked my mother-in-law, I needed to speak with Lisa. She had her wake up, and she came out and said, "Hey, tomorrow we're going to church." My wife thought there was something else happening. She said, "No, tomorrow we're going to church." We went to church. We drank of this living water. But when you drink of this living water, you can't keep it to yourself. So we went back, and I went to my mother-in-law, said, "You need to hear this. You need to experience it, because if you only knew the gift of God and who is talking to you, you would actually jump in the car and get with me." So I took my aunt, my mother-in-law, and we both went, and they were both baptized. And with the time, it's incredible. I was able to speak to my dad, and God gave me the blessing of baptizing my dad. But you see, I had a grandma that I loved dearly, and she was 74, and my grandfather was 86. And my grandpa said, "Hey, I have my own religion. My home is my religion. I do my own thing." But my grandpa didn't know about this living water. And I prayed for him, and he invited him to hear. And he heard. And both him and my grandma had the privilege of baptizing them as well. They now passed away. It's been some years now. But they passed away with hope. They passed away knowing their purpose. It's incredible to see my grandma at her age serving around the church and loving on the people and experiencing this life that she had never experienced before. At her old age, I remember asking my grandpa, how do you feel? And he said, son, I only have one regret. I should have come to Jesus way sooner. But I'm glad he did. I'm glad he did. Let me ask you, my friend, what are you doing with your story? You see, your story is the story that people need to hear. Your story is the story that people are waiting for. So how can we share this story? This is not very difficult. This is something super simple. I want to challenge you this very week to think about two people, at least two people that you can share your story with. Now, don't overcomplicate it. This is the only thing you need to do in order to share your story. Number one, pray for an opportunity. And the Lord opens doors where people are actually listening and wanting and curious and open to hearing your story. So number one, pray and say, Lord, who can I share my story with? Who can I share my story with? Number two, share what you went through. And this is going to take some courage, because some of the things we're not very proud of. But it's going to take some courage, and you pray, God will give you the courage. And you can share the story. This can transform the lives of people. Number three, super important, share your well story. How did you sit down there at the well? What did Jesus speak into your life? What was this moment like when it clicked, when it made sense to you? And last, share how God changed, how your story changed after your encounter with God. How many of us think that this is something simple that we could practice together? You could raise your hand. Is this something simple? It's not very complicated, but there's tons of people that need to hear the story. And at times you think, well, they are never going to be interested. Let me tell you a story about somebody I thought would never be interested. When I came to Jesus, I was part of something that I'm ashamed of today. And I had around 19 pounds of illegal drugs in my home. And I was moving that. And I realized that I no longer could be a part of that. So I had to take that to its owner. And I had to give him an explanation. So I prayed. And I took the material. And I went to the boss. And I knew that it could go very, very wrong. So I decided that if it's going to be wrong, I was going to tell him the truth. And I brought the material to him, and he's like, hey, why are you bringing this back? He's like, do you need more money? He's like, no. I'm out. What do you mean you're out? He's like, yeah, I'm out. I'm no longer going to do this. But how are we going to work this out? He's like, no. Let me tell you why. You see, while we were doing this, I felt miserable. I realized that this is not my purpose. I don't think I was born for this. And I don't think that you were born for this. And I have to tell you something. I've met Jesus in my life. And I can't do this anymore. And he was super surprised and super quiet, and I was super worried. And I prayed in my heart, Lord, help us. And he looked at me and he said, we're good. That's a great decision that you're making. Maybe I'll take that step one day. I'm happy for you. I'm glad you're doing this. I said, well, thank you. I really appreciate your understanding this. I'll bring some money that's missing from this. He said, you don't owe me anything. You don't owe me absolutely anything. Just leave. I'm happy for you, man. This is great. We hugged, I prayed, and I left. A few years later, I received a letter from my friend. He was doing 7 years in prison. And the one thing that helped him go through those 7 years was the conversation that we had. He said, Edwin, if there's hope for you. There may be hope for me. I said, hey man, I'm sure, absolutely sure, that your story, your worst story, can become your best story. Absolutely best. But there's something that you need to do. You need to decide that you're going to come to the living well, because it's the only way that your worst story can become your best. You see, God has an ease to take our worst stories and make the most beautiful things out of it. God has this way of taking these horrible things that we went through, these horrible things that we lived through, and making them absolutely beautiful. I'm wondering if there's someone here that needs to leave their story, leave absolutely behind their past, their regret, their shame, their guilt, and say, Lord, from now on, I am going to come to the well, and I am going to drink of that absolutely everlasting water. That water that will always satisfy. That water that will speak into your life, not only your life, the life of your family, the life of those around you. But in order to move forward, there's some things that we need to leave behind. And the great thing is that you don't have to do this alone. God was never asking you to do it alone. He knew the Samaritan woman was suffering. She knew the type of life that she was living. He knew about the prejudice, about the problems, and he decided to go out of his way and go straight to the well. Well, he would meet her. And I'm sure that if you're here today, maybe searching for some answers, maybe looking for some type of healing in your life, God planned this moment specifically to speak into your heart. So as we share this moment together, I'd like to invite you to decide to leave absolutely everything behind, and come close and center to Jesus Christ. And my friend Jorge and I, with our band, we're going to sing a beautiful song, and the desire is that as we sing, God will speak into your heart, and you can make that decision to transform your worst story into your best story. And maybe I'm speaking also to someone that has experienced this. Well, you need to share it with someone. There's a coworker, there's a friend, there's a family member that needs to hear this. So let's start from the beginning and let's just leave absolutely everything behind. Leave it all behind. Leave it all behind. Leave it all behind. Leave it all behind. I have what you need, but you keep on searching. I've done all the work, but you keep on working. When you're running on empty and you can't find a remedy, just come to the well.
You can spend your whole life chasing what's missing, but that empty inside is just ain't gonna listen. When nothing can satisfy and the world leaves you high and dry, just come to the well.
And all who thirst will thirst no more, and all who search will find what their souls long for. The world will try, but it can never fail. So leave it all behind and come to the well.
So bring me your heart, no matter how broken. Just come as you are,
Just rest in my arms a while. You'll feel the change, my child, when you come to the well. Yeah. All who thirst will thirst no more, and all who search will find what their souls long for. The world will try, but it can never fail. So leave it all behind and come to the well. And now that you're full of love beyond measure, your joy's gonna flow like a stream in the desert.
Soon at the world will see the living water is found in me, 'cause you come to the well. Yeah.
All who search will thirst no more, and all who search will find what their souls long for. The world will try, but it can never fail. So leave it all behind and come to the well. And all who thirst will thirst no more, and all who search will find what their souls long for. The world will try, but it can never fail. So leave it all behind and come to the well. So leave it all behind and come to the well. There's someone in this place that could say, Lord, I want to come to the well. Amen.